Thank you for coming to Center Square Society. We have a great event today in collaboration with the Remembrance Society and
Talk about
Honorable
this.
Don Ritter. I will turn it over to you. Please, guys, use the microphone.
Okay. So these microphones, as I understand it, are for
They're for the
streaming
broadcast.
purposes.
Yes.
So we still need to speak up so that the people in the back of the room can hear us. Thank you, and thank you, Free Peoples of Russia House, aka Senate Square Society, recent rebranding, for allowing this event to take place and helping to publicize it and providing a venue. So Yevgeny, wherever you are, Ilya, somewhere in Ukraine, thank you. So we're going to talk about Afghanistan this evening. I take it you've received the description of what we're trying to do here. Afghanistan has generally been put in the rearview mirror with the West, with the United States for sure. In fact, probably broke the rearview mirror and threw it away. But Afghanistan, we need to learn from what happened because it's a critical point in history, and we need to remember the Remembrance Society, which I chair, is dedicated to bringing up issues of the past which inform us about the present and give us a way forward to the future. The Remembrance Society has worked closely on issues related to communism, totalitarianism, the Soviet Union, post-Soviet Russia, Vladimir Putin, the reach of the totalitarian governments in Latin America, the criminality of Putin. I want to just introduce our Director of Education, David Satter, is here. You may know him. He has written major books on Soviet Russia and also post-Soviet Russia. Thank you, David. And I want to also introduce our Executive Director, Christina Olney, who is a major mover and shaker in helping us to put on our events and get the right people. So I go back to 1979. Jihad was a good word in the 80s. The Soviets invaded in 79, and we sought to help them. By the way, David Isby, an arms expert, and he was with Janes at the time, is here with us today. And I was involved in helping to win the war with people like Charlie Wilson, actually involved before Charlie Wilson, and several other members of Congress. And there was a lapse between the end of the war and 2011. I had led a group called the Afghanistan Foundation. Some of you know about it. And we were the only voice in town saying, this is what's going on there. It's dangerous. It's horrible. There's going to be a blow up. And of course, we experienced 9/11. Post 9/11 was a critical time. The Afghanistan experiment was to bring a new society, a new form of government to the Afghan people. Probably, this is quite questionable. We'll hear about it from our panelists. And I was in business there. I was for 9 years president and CEO of the Afghan American Chamber of Commerce, and lived in Sharonau, the neighborhood, for whenever I was in the country, spent about 1/3 of my time. So what we have assembled here tonight is a panel of people who will go back and talk about the history, talk about the impact of the various countries who were active. And, we're talking about Russia, we're talking about Pakistan, we're talking about the United States, we're talking about NATO and the attempt to bring a kind of imposed Western style of democracy, build an economy from the top down, which had its issues. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Anna Borshevskaya. She's with the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. She has written widely about Russian history in the Middle East, has a book about the Russian engagement in Syria, and has to leave at 8 o'clock, so we're going to put her on first. So Anna, pick up your mic and let's go.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and I'm especially happy to speak about Afghanistan because it's not a country that I get to speak about.
We need to speak up because the microphone is screaming, and you have to enunciate loud.
Can you hear me now? Is this better? Excellent. 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 I worked with the U.S. military in Afghanistan in 2010. So it is a special honor for me to talk about this country because it's, as you said, Afghanistan is in the rearview mirror for many of us, but it's certainly not for me. I am going to speak about Russia's experience in Afghanistan, and I'd like to frame my comments and the discussion of Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in terms of the lessons Russia has taken away from it. Because the fact of the matter is Russia has extracted a number of key significant lessons from losing that war. And what we're seeing today, a lot of what we see in terms of what Russia is doing is how these lessons are playing out. So the first lesson is that Russia learned it can't ignore the rest of the world. It needs allies. The second lesson is that resources are limited, even for a country like Russia that has enormous military, economic, and human resources. And third, Russia, in order to stay committed to the long view, it needs to maintain flexibility. In other words, Russia can change tactics. It can change how it approaches things, but it won't change its long-term vision. So let me explain what I mean by each one of these points. Here's what I mean by the fact that Russia needs allies. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, there was not a single country that supported that invasion. Even the so-called non-alignment movement did not express any particular support. The Soviet Union stood alone. And if you look at how Russia is acting on the world stage today, how Putin's Russia acted on the world stage, there's a very different dynamic. If you look at the example of Syria, Russia did not go into Syria alone. Russia relied on allies such as Iran to do most of the heavy lifting. In fact, Iran has spent infinitely more resources in terms of both blood and treasure on Syria, and Russia got to reap the benefits of propping up the Assad regime. And you see these lessons playing out in many other parts of the world. Even with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, what we're seeing is that it has been possible to isolate Russia globally because the so-called global South continues to support Russia's war. In fact, at this point, it's become a global war. And because it has been so difficult to isolate Russia, it continues to find resources to fight this war. Just this week, we're seeing North Koreans once again providing additional support to Russia's invasion. So this was a very important lesson learned. The second is resources are limited. During the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, as this audience I'm sure knows, Russia had spared no expense. There were tens of thousands of Soviet advisors in all levels of government. The Soviet Union essentially engineered an invasion and did not spare any expense. I was born in the Soviet Union. I left Russia as a refugee when I was a child, and I remember absorbing, growing up in Moscow, the trauma of Afghanistan permeated society. You just absorbed it unconsciously growing up. And the lesson here for Russia is that it was no longer going to do invasions this way. Certainly Syria was not one of those. Syria was an invasion that Russia has done with surgical precision, with limited resources and limited people committed to that particular invasion. This was a very important lesson learned. And third, again, my point was that Russia is committed to the long view, and that means you can change tactics, you can be flexible, but you're not going to change what you ultimately want to accomplish. And what is incredibly playing out today with regards to Afghanistan is that Russia now is the only country that has recognized the Taliban. Now, think about what this means. The Taliban is probably the most anti-Russian group there has been in recent history. It's hard to think of any other group or country that has been as anti-Russian. And the fact that the Kremlin has been able to build a relationship with them, and now they're engaged in military exchanges, they're engaging in trade, giving this government legitimacy, says a lot about how this Russia behaves on the world stage today, and what kind of a challenge Putin's Russia poses to us. So, and the big picture, of course, remains the same, and that is that Russia remains committed to changing the world order, to seeing a different world where the United States no longer has the primacy in world affairs that it had. We routinely hear Russians talk about so-called multipolar or polycentric world. And so all of these steps continue to support that vision, and that is a very dangerous vision, one that portends more chaos, more war, and more instability. And I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a passing note, in 10 years of Russia's war against or in Afghanistan, 1.5 million Afghans. The fabric of society was rent and torn, on which destroyed social fabric, grew civil war and eventually the Taliban. So Russia after they left, and then we weren't doing anything. So let me go right now to thanks, Anna, to Ali Jalali, who served in the old Afghan military, was during jihad in the 80s. This is when jihad was a good word, by the way. Was a correspondent for the Voice of America, and I remember doing quite a number of interviews with you, Ali. And after the fall of the Taliban, after 9/11, Ali Jalali was very active in the new Afghan government, became Minister of the Interior, is a distinguished professor at the National Defense University today, and a kind of man for all seasons when you think about what happened over those 20 years of our engagement in Afghanistan.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, or should I project? Okay.
Good to go.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm very pleased to see some old friends. David is here. I think if you ask something about those 1980s, the Afghan, the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan, you can ask David. He was the active writer in those days and analyst. His books, I think, tells a lot about those 1980s, and I'm pleased to see you again, David. And also his book about Afghanistan. The title, we discussed this, and we had some disagreement on the title about the Afghanistan, the graveyard of empires, which I said that maybe it's not the graveyard of empire, it's the graveyard of Afghans. Because maybe Afghanistan, most of in the history, it was the victim of empires. It was the victim of competition between empires even from the 17th century. The Uzbeks in the north, Safavids in the east, and the Mughal Empire in India. Later on, between the Tsarist Russia and the British India. And finally, in the 100 years, the past 100 years, you see the few countries who has been invaded by three major powers: the Soviet Union, the British Soviet Union, and the United States involved there. So anyway, I think there's so much to talk about the situation. Thank you that you're asking us to go back and see what happened in Afghanistan. Next week, Taliban will celebrate the 50th year of their victory in Afghanistan. It did not start it like that. It's a long history. I think it started with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. A few years back in Ghazni, an old man was talking about he was nostalgic about the past. He said, look, in the old days that there was the security everywhere. I can move freely everywhere. I had a very small farm, and I was happy with that kind. It was not very, I was not very wealthy, but I was happy. There was no ethnic, problems. There tolerance everywhere. Different ethnic groups were working with each other. But that's what I don't understand. I said, well, why it happened? And he said, okay, if I tell you that all happened from the outside, you will tell me that. How about you guys? What you did that? He said, we are very fragile people, fragile country, poor country. But when the outside intervene, then all these problems, this fragility actually disappear. Leads to destruction. That's what happened in Afghanistan. So what do you want from the international community? I was Minister of Interior. That can convey this. I said, they cannot do anything for me. I said, why? He said, because even if I ask something, they cannot do it. I said, tell me more. Then he said, can they undo what they did to us? He said, we were poor country, neutral country. We did not attack or invaded any country. And we were happy with whatever we had. We were poor, but happy. There was harmony, stability. Then one superpower came, invaded us. The other superpower came to fight us on the Afghanistan battlefield. That was happening, he said. Then they cannot undo that. And everything started from there. Started with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, so actual infiltration in Afghanistan. If you look at some of the literature of the Soviet, analysts now, the military historians of the Russia now assert that the Soviet invasion was defensive in nature and aimed at ending a chaotic situation in the Soviet Union immediate neighborhood, that's Afghanistan. If this was the goal, I would say, if that was the goal, the invasion further intensified the chaos, expanding the conflict into wider regional and global dimension, and contributed to the breakup of the Soviet Union. That is what actually happened. That is the beginning. That was the genesis of the problem we see today in Afghanistan. Whatever it is, political, whether it's economic, ethnic, nationalistic, whatever you call it. That started from there. I like what my friend Bonnie Rubin once wrote in his book, and I quote, in the extent that terrorists have found refuge and training in Afghanistan, the blame must go to all those who destroyed that country's fragile institutions, starting with the Soviet Union. So when you talk about Soviet Union, eventually you go that to these problems that you see in Afghanistan all started from there. Before the invasion, I was going around in Afghanistan in different capacity. I was in the government. In one case, when there was conflict between tribes, we went there. There were mechanisms in Afghanistan, both government mechanism and also the tribal mechanism. They were all coming together and resolve problems very quickly. I walked from the border of Kandahar all the way to Paktia, met with people at that time. But that was the way people were just trying to resolve this. Now, what happened? The Soviet Union came in. They wanted to establish a system that was neither compatible with the culture of Afghans, not even in the modern world. I was reading the New York Times correspondent interview once in the Soviet Union. I'm happy that you remember the resources were very limited, and that's why in those days, even if 1992, they were complaining that they are falling behind the West on high technology. If they cannot catch up, he said, in 10 years, the Soviet Union will turn into a third world country. So they had to catch up, he said. In order to catch up, they had to go to change. That was exactly the same thing that Mr. Ogarkov, General Ogarkov, the chief of general staff of the Soviet Union, wrote in his book, Always Ready to Defend the Motherland or Fatherland. In that book, he said the same thing. Ogarkov, had to pay for that in his book. But later on, Glasnost and Perestroika actually was the result of that. But every time in the Soviet history, you see, if they go to NEP, new economic program, they have to loosen something. But every time they come back to war communism, they cannot go back to that. That actually, the last NEP was Glasnost. So for Afghanistan, the damage was done. The Soviet Union, whatever they do, in 1990s, I was the editor-in-large for the Central Asia, and I'm now working my book on this after the empire, what happened. Central Asia had to pay for many years for what they did to them during the Soviet period. That book is after the empire, journeys in the first decade of independence of the Central Asia. So we can talk about it forever. They started like that, but they actually damaged themselves too. The Soviet Union also lost so much, but Afghans after that never saw a stability in Afghanistan, and during the resistance, the resistance was supported not in a way to bring a better time for the country in the future, but to serve the interest of the regional country like Pakistan. Pakistan was, after the Soviet Union, Pakistan was the main reason for the problem that actually haunted Afghanistan until today. We can go back to that. This is one issue that I was asked to focus on. The second one is the after 9/11. What happened in all these 20 years? How we lost that? Well, we have written about it. Everybody had written about this. There are so many studies about this. And the last study was Afghanistan study group that I was as a senior advisor there. And the report was published in 2021 in February. It is available on the United States Peace Institute website. In that, the report, I think, it is clearly the report says that the United States should prolong withdrawal after 2021. And there was, yes, I know my time is over. But just to be brief, I think what happened after that, I've summarized it in an article 2006, which was published in Parameters. the future of Afghanistan. Four issues I mentioned there that is going to shape the future of Afghanistan. And they were first, that nation building on the cheap, tactics without strategy, failure of the Afghans to integrate domestic authority structures, and finally, Pakistan's support for anti-stability in Afghanistan. And finally, I will ask you, how about now the geostrategic situation of Afghanistan? You know, Afghanistan was always had important geostrategic position in Afghanistan. The last book of Arnold Toynbee is From Oxus to Jamna. Here it says that if you want to follow the major historical events, start from Mesopotamia, Middle East. From there, the road to our west passes through Aleppo, and to the east passes through Bagram. Bagram was the center of Khoshanids. The Bagram was the base of the Soviet Union when they invaded Afghanistan. Bagram was the major base of the US forces when I was working in Afghanistan. So it is not going to change. However, the policies around Afghanistan will change, but the significance of geostrategic of the country will have some significance. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that I think during the 90s, the role of Pakistan cannot be overestimated. It is absolutely enormous, in that the Taliban did not exist without Pakistan. Pakistan created under Benazir Bhutto and the inter-services intelligence agencies. They created the Taliban, they hosted the Taliban, they armed the Taliban, they trained the Taliban. You know, and you might wish to comment on this, General. We were at war with Pakistan, okay? The Taliban were nothing. They were ragtag, but the three major shuras in Peshawar, Marin Shah, and Quetta, they were on the border with Afghanistan. They were in Pakistan, and all the leadership lived there. Everybody knew it, who they were. In any event, I'd like to pass this microphone to General Alizai, who has the distinguished honor of being the last chief of staff of the Afghan army in the days of collapse of the Afghan government and the precipitous withdrawal from Afghanistan by the United States and NATO, and also his route to being the top gun in the ANDSF, the Afghan National Security Forces, and ANDSF, yes, was the head of the commandos, the Afghan Special Forces. And the Afghan commandos and special forces were doing the bulk of the frontline fighting for the last several years in Afghanistan. And the casualties of the United States and NATO allies were extremely small. So they had, they were the frontline fighters, but they also had to deal with the entirety of the Afghan National Defense Forces, those forces' dependence on the Western contractors to supply, logistics, air power, and what have you. But anyway, get your take on this whole issue.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here, and thanks for inviting me. I like the topic, and when I got the email, I said, like, yeah, I'm gonna start from the beginning, but it has to be in 8 minutes. That's what the direction was, but that's totally acceptable. Afghan National Defense and Security Forces didn't exist when U.S. came to Afghanistan back in 2001. It was the result of the 9/11 and U.S. invasion into Afghanistan. And we started from a platoon to the company to the battalion, brigade, and corps level. And I remember the first special forces units that were established in Afghanistan. Those were the Special Mission Wing, the 333, and the 1st Battalion of Commandos, and the 01 unit back in around 2002 and 2003. And they were doing pretty good. And by years passing, the battalion became a brigade, and the brigade became a division for the ANASOC, Afghan National Army Special Operations Division was created in around 2013 and 14 when the transfer was happening from the U.S. and NATO forces to the Afghan forces. And then it turned out to be a corps, which was Afghan National Army Special Operations Command, that was created in 2017. And we had 4 brigades in 4 parts of Afghanistan that were all commandos. And we had a Special Forces Brigade that's called National Mission Brigade that has Special Forces battalions under them. And then we got to have JSOC and then Joint Special Operations Coordination Center, and that turned out to be Joint Special Operations Command. And in 2021, JSOC and ANASOC merged together for the unity of command when I took over as the commander of the ANASOC, the entire Afghan National Army Special Operations Forces. And we had the control over the GCPSU, which was the police special units, and the almost 0 units, the NDS Special Forces, the Special Mission Wing. For years, the whole Special Forces community of Afghanistan were taking most of the weight of the war on their shoulders. They were providing offensive support operations. They were providing defensive operations in support of the local forces. They were pretty much involved in rotations, logistics supplies, medevac, casevac, with different tiers of units. 2021 was not an easy year, and that was the year where entirely ANASOC and the whole Afghan Special Forces community was holding the entire war on their shoulders, since we were spread too much thin through the years in checkpoints in small bases that became small targets for the enemy. And the ANASOC had to act differently. And we launched surge all over Afghanistan in 2021 that led us to find more evidence of Pakistani involvement, Iranian involvement, our neighbors' involvement. Their militias were being killed on the front line. The TTP, the international terrorist organization members, were being killed, and then we would seize their dead bodies. And after the SSE, site-sensitive exploitation, we would find out which country they belonged to. It was not an easy war. It was a global war on terrorism, the way they say it was. And in reality, the tense was there. I always used to ask my father, who is a retired 3-star general, I say, how was the Soviet time fighting looking like? And he was like, how is your fight? I say, I fight in more than 130 spots in an irregular way every 24 hours. And this is the tempo, and this is the situation. And he would say, like, yeah, it was tense at that time too, but it looks like you guys are doing more, and you never take a break. So the experience was there. It helped us with a lot of experience. We had soldiers, we had NCOS officers that were able, they most of them had the experience of conducting at least 500 to 600 only night raids part of their career, which is a big experience. And that experience never existed in any special forces at that time, I can claim, on earth, because every night they were out for an operation in some part of Afghanistan. The point is that the Pakistanis and our neighbors like Iran and China, Russia, they never had mercy on Afghans, I believe. And I'm telling this to everybody that when we were fighting the global war on terrorism in Afghanistan, we were defending their borders, we were defending their population, but they were not grateful for that. You know, they were hosting Taliban and giving them sanctuaries in Pakistan. They were providing trainings, equipment, and businesses in Iran, and the Central Asian countries were supporting them with creating businesses to fight against us. The Russians and Chinese were inviting them to Beijing and Moscow and providing them conferences and seminars to legitimize them, to show us that we were there and we were doing nothing. Now that they're suffering, they're shouting, they're screaming, which is their own result of their own actions. I believe if we were in Afghanistan by now, can you imagine al-Zawahiri would be able to be staying in parts of Kabul? I don't think so. They could not even come closer to the cities because the pace and up tempo we had through the years were not allowing them. We had the best counterterrorism units and the collection, analysis, and targeting teams all over Afghanistan. We had task forces everywhere, every part of Afghanistan, alongside with our American and NATO special forces brothers, especially with Americans and American interagency. So we had SIGINT and HUMAN, plenty and clear information about them being there. So the point is that if today Afghanistan was under our control, it would be a better leverage for US, for Afghans, and for the modern and democratic world. Since we are not there yet, Iranians are giving everybody a hard time. Just imagine if we were in Afghanistan and we had these oppositions of Iranians provided with some trainings, some support. That would be a big deal. That would be a big change. And Iranians knew this. That's why they made the war so expensive for us, with partnership with Pakistan, Russia, and China. They knew this was coming, and they just tried their best to make us fail. But I think this is not over yet. And there is a lot of room, there's a lot of capacity that could help the war to lead to a succeed. So I'm not going to take more time. I think I'm completely on 10 minutes or 8 minutes or so. But yeah, open to questions. Thank you.
Just a quick question for you, General. If you might want to comment on the precipitous falling apart of the Afghan military in the closing weeks, days of that war. Why was the fall so sharp? What was going on?
It's a very good question, and I hope I can cover it in as less time as I can, but I believe it was a process. It was not just the last 1 week that everybody is talking about. Of course, we had strength points. In the meantime, we had weaknesses too, through the 20 years. The political umbrella of Afghanistan or the political community of Afghanistan were never able to understand and digest fully the situation of Afghanistan, which comes from the presidents, their deputies, and some of their cabinet members. I believe that not the first president, which was President Karzai, not the President Ghani, were able or They were not willing to understand the reality on the ground. If they were, I was the Afghan National Army Special Operations Corps commander. I was leading a lot of operations every day. In 2021, in that dire situation, I had the chance to meet him twice. And we had 2 more calls, which were not going really well. So the point is, there was not a will to understand the reality. We needed more equipment. We needed more support since we were fighting the front line of the global terrorism and supporting and keeping the world safe, you know? But when US was leaving, the steps of withdrawal, the Doha deal, the Doha office, everything, it will take hours to talk about. And I have great details to all of them. But I believe you guys can wait for a few days. I think the Afghan War Commission and the Pentagon, they are going to release reports, and I have given them great details. Hopefully, they will include most of them, if not all of them. But the point is that it was step-by-step collapse. And if you run out of ammunition, if you run out of contractors to fix your helicopters, if you run out of precision strike missiles, then the empty weapons cannot fight. And in the meantime, you don't have a strong political support for that. And then the international media role is something that always supported Taliban. If they would have a small achievement, it would become a global media topic. But we would go and clear districts like Arghandab with 5,600 IEDs cleared and around 2,500 KIA of the enemy, but no one talked about it. Yes, of course, it was our mistake too. Especially personally, I did make a mistake that beside everything we were doing, everything was great. And even our advisors and brothers who were working with us would come like, how you guys do it? But our weak point was that we could not let you guys know or the world know what we were doing. We thought it's our job, we have to do it. If someone knows it or not, we don't care. That was the level of confidence. But the point is that most of the people, even in Afghanistan, does not know that, what we have done for Afghanistan in 20 years. But the collapse was not a week, it was 6 to 7 different terms that led to the collapse. The start was horrible, and then it led all the way to the end. I can tell you, when President Karzai doesn't consider himself as the chief of the armed forces, commander in chief, what would this soldier think? If the president comes to the stage and says, our brothers, Taliban, what would the soldier think in the battlefield? Well, when they are facing VBIDs, suicide attacks, IEDs, roadside bombs, their heads were being chopped. We have a lot of dire examples of those situations time to time. And then the same thing with the President Ghani's team and his surroundings. He was a good person. He could not lead us the way we wanted. We needed more equipment in 2021. He was coming to US. But he could not get us those things. We asked for US to stay for a couple more years because young generation was just taken over, but it didn't happen too. So it was step by step, led to the failure and to the collapse. It was not a one-day thing. Good people existed, of course, and I've told you about that on the phone call too. Some really good people, but the floor was not set for the people to act professionally from the beginning and work it out for long term. And 20 years is also not a long time to create an army and then put them into the global war on terrorism and expect them to be exactly as a 300 years old army. So they need time.
Thank you, thank you. And especially, again, I return to the fact that the Taliban leadership lived high on the hog in Pakistan, that their fighters rested and regrouped and were trained in Pakistan. And in a sense, the war was with Pakistan. And the Afghans were fighting Pakistan. Now, they had American support, but Pakistan is a nation of 225 million people with a large border, and they were dedicated. And it started when Pakistan really controlled a lot of jihad in the 1980s and just built upon it over the years. Anyway, I'd like to open up the discussion amongst the panelists. That they have. Oh no! Wait a second. General Arnie Fields, who was dear friend, colleague at the Afghan American Chamber of Commerce for many years. Arnie was the special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, affectionately known as SIGAR, SIGAR, and witnessed what was going on the funding of Reconstruction, the corruption, the problems that they faced. And Arnie, you want to comment on that? What might have some of the weaknesses might have led to
Thank you, sir, and thank you for facilitating this forum this evening. And I wish to acknowledge the Remembrance Society as well as the Senate Square Society. I understand these entities helped to facilitate this gathering this evening, but certainly would not be of its greatest value were it not for you who have taken time to be here today. I want you to know that I drove up here. Actually, I took a train up almost, and I drove part of the way from Alpharetta, Georgia, to be here because I was invited. This is a relatively unique experience for me, and I have known Congressman Ritter since 2008. We met by way of my duties as the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, and we have maintained that personal friendship and professional friendship ever since. But I am in search of peace, and I trust that you are in search of peace too. And I have seen it over my 35 years of active military service elude us, human beings, to the point at which we have missed some opportunities along the way. And I believe that Afghanistan was and remains one of those opportunities that we missed. And I'm sorry about that. But there is a possibility that it still might come about. I'm excited and very honored to be among this distinguished panel this evening. And I thank the panel from your respective positions, be they academic or military or otherwise, for your contribution to peace, your writings by which I'm confident that somebody is benefiting. So I've been asked to address a number of things, and I'll just hit a couple of wave tops here, and I may come back to some of these at your questions during the Q&A or question and answer period. But my experience as the Special Inspector General was the most unique experience I've had in my life. I was tasked with congressional legislation, which was a part of the 2008 National Defense Authorization Act that provides a mechanism by which the defense establishment is funded. And so inserted in that legislation was the stand-up of the Office of Special Inspector General. I had some expertise in that area because subsequent to my retirement from the Marine Corps, I worked for the Department of State as the Chief of Staff of the Iraq Reconstruction and Management Office. That office oversaw the funding for our operations and reconstruction in Iraq, and from which we should have learned enough lessons that might have been applicable to the Afghanistan situation. And I believe we missed some opportunities there, because once Afghanistan came about, we made some of the same mistakes in Afghanistan that we had already made in Iraq, and from which we should have learned more than we learned. I made it my business as Inspector General to visit as many of the senior leaders in Afghanistan as I could. I started early with President Karzai, and I want you to know that he treated me with considerable dignity and respect, as did each of the governors around Afghanistan during my respective visits there. I had some great experiences in Afghanistan from which an elderly man like myself have learned. And one of the ones that I remember most, and I'll be short with this and then we can move on to the rest of this evening. But I was taken to a location in a province, not at my request, but my representatives in Afghanistan knew the kinds of things that I needed to see and hear in Afghanistan. So they took me to a school of young kids about the height of my knee. And I wanted to know what those children were thinking about their country, Afghanistan. These were first, second, and third grade kids. And speaking through an interpreter and translator, I wanted to know what the kids wanted. And according to what I heard, and I'm believing what I heard was the truth, that these kids wanted exactly what the governors of the provinces had already told me and what President Karzai himself had already shared with me. They wanted good schools. They wanted good roads. They wanted simple things that we take advantage of here in the United States of America, lighting in their respective homes. And the one that truly broke my heart was when they said, we want a full floor in our school, because the school consisted of 4 walls and dirt. And these kids wanted a floor in their school. And I believe that everybody in Afghanistan wanted electric lights. They wanted floors in their homes. And by all means, they wanted security. And we didn't deliver. And if you read the report that the current or the immediately past Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction wrote, it's a very sad report. $148 billion we spent, and what did we get for it? He says nothing of considerable value, because his articulation of where we stood at the end of the incursion was a failure. So I would be interested in hearing what others here tonight may have to say about our experience in Afghanistan. I would like to say that it was not a total failure. I want to say that there was something that someone took away from the Afghanistan experience that has made an individual a better person, and I'm believing that Afghanistan still realizes that there was a positive contribution from all of the energy and money, billions of dollars, that not only the United States of America, not only NATO, but the entire international community brought to bear upon objectives in Afghanistan. So I will not agree wholly with the Inspector General, but I do believe that we did make some serious mistakes along the way, and much of it involved corruption. Thank you.
Okay, I think we should just open the discussion amongst the panelists and open it for Q&A. But I wanted to make one point that might come up, that is the economy. As President of the CEO of the Afghan economy for 9 years, have invested personally in the business in Afghanistan. We threw billions of dollars into the government, to World Bank officials, to development bank. Our model of AID, government agent, and Afghan government leadership. In other words, the economy was kind of top down, and that's not the way you build a healthy economy. It was very complicated. It was largely contracting grant, and it stifled creation of a healthy market, which the East Asian countries succeeded. And they didn't have superimposed a parliamentary democracy presidency, Western style government, brought to them immediately. They worked their way up. And the market economy was so crucial because the corruption that emerges from billions of dollars thrown up against a wall at a contracting grant. It's like the multi-millionaires that I knew that lived in Dubai who had simply been translators for government agencies, U.S. government agencies, Afghan government agencies. It's just amazing. I mean, young men driving around in, special Rolls Royces at the age of 32. I mean, 10%, I'll give you the subcontract for, you give me 10%, and you'll know what exactly the ground rules are for providing this contract, whether it's, every single government agency was infused. The World Bank operated this way. They had no capacity to, and that's the problem with throwing money at agencies as opposed to investing in companies and building them over time. And I'd like to get some thoughts about the economic issue and also what General Ali brought up about there's a war in Iran. And we don't have bases anymore. Our $1 trillion worth of concrete, steel, and electronics are inhabited by who knows who, the Taliban military, equipped with night vision glasses, left $7 billion worth of equipment there. We have armed a terrorist nation. Any thoughts about that? Ali, you want to?
Yes, I think all of these are relevant issues. When we talk about Marshall Plan in Europe, I think at that time, the Marshall Plan investment was about $13 billion. With today's dollars, probably $105 billion. Well, apart from the issue that Europe, West Europe or Germany, other countries that suffered from the war, are very different, very, very advanced countries. But at the same time, what happened is that from the money that came to Afghanistan, only 10% of it or 15% of it through the government budget. The rest through contractors. And 40% of money did not leave the donor countries. The rest which came, the contracts would take it, it's subcontracted, and that subcontract was subcontracted to another one. And in 2 cases when I was in the government, in some cases, the money actually only 5 to 15% of the money reached the intended project or people. So all the rest was actually like a sieve. It was moving around the way, wasting. Why these people got rich? Contractor, subcontractor, subcontractor, and subcontractor. Everybody got something. And you know,
And translate.
yeah. And now in 2005, that was last year, I was in the Minister of Interior. I asked the police the budget, and some contractors were providing gasoline for the police and Kunar area. 1 gallon was charged $500 because most of it they will charge for security overload, overweight, and therefore this is how the money was used. The reason is, first of all, only 10% or 15% went through government budget. The rest was just free for all. And then at the same time, since Afghanistan institutions were not integrated, and that was one reason that I resigned in 2005, it was not, it could not, trace. In one case in Zabul province, and the contractor or the supply chain lost track of thousands of weapons that were divided because the donor or the contractor would give it to that person or that organization, and that was not counted. So it was all of these. This corruption is fine. I think it is also a reason, and from the top to bottom, to the soldiers whose allowances were taken by their officers. All these were happening in Afghanistan. So therefore, the economy never was a stable economy. It was a bubble in some areas. In 2004, we proposed to USAID, Mr. Nazio was the director, that 3 things can build the basis of economy in Afghanistan: power, water, and roads. And what I was received the answer: we don't do roads, we don't do dams, we don't do the power. It takes a long time, and we are for quick impact projects. What happened to these quick impact projects? It was just disappeared. And I even told me that during the Soviet, aid program to Afghanistan in 1970s, 1960s, you see what happened and what remained from that. The Surubi Dam, the road, the highways, Salang. What do you see now from the 10 times or 100 times the Western countries helped Afghanistan? What happened? Can you see any kind of people will always reminded us that find us something like that, like a dam, like a Surubi Dam, like a Durant Dam, like a Salang highway, like a Salang tunnel. Then we will see that you don't see even today anything of that kind.
Yeah, if I want to make 2 quick comments, if I may, to your question about whether Afghanistan was a total failure. As somebody who lived briefly in Afghanistan and worked in Afghanistan and saw the impact of how the United States behaved in Afghanistan rather than how the Soviet Union behaved in Afghanistan, I think there were. I'd be curious what everybody else thinks, but from my perspective, I think it was not a total failure. One aspect that was that one thing that we achieved that the Soviets could not was progress in women's rights. I met young women who were able to get an education, who were able to start a business, who were able to work in government, and this was not just for show. This was not PR. This was real. When I was there, I remember how scared these women were that the Taliban would come back. and that those fledgling rights that they had just been able to start grappling with, start realizing, were going to be quickly taken back. So I don't think it was a total failure.
You don't feel the thing if it's not, you do not agree with, who was the recent, ambassador?
Mr. Sutko.
That it wasn't a total failure, and I agree with you totally. Just from the women, what do you mean, women? We were liberated, we must deal with the level they did. I mean, I met Kendall Carson, fantastic people for that, who had made big. So there was so many problems, but again, Afghanistan actually was, in spite of all the corruption, Afghanistan was, because it freed up 4 million people, 20 million, economy was starting to grow. But you can't withdraw from a war that the other side is still fighting. That's sort of
it's not a failure. There was a lot of achievement. The failure is how it lost. It was lost so suddenly. That's the failure.
Yeah. You know, you get started commenting on what our president in Afghanistan given Taliban 75 miles from Iran, 225 miles from Tehran. Shindan, 75 miles from the Iranian border.
There's one
During the presence of the U.S. force in Afghanistan, it was agreed between the allies that we will not provoke Iran. That's why I was the chairman of PRT, steering committees. In many provinces, the PRT were established by different countries. But for purposefully, the PRT for Nimroz province was decided not to establish, not to provoke Iran, because the Zaranj was 5 miles from the border. On the other hand, at the same time, the restrictions that was posed on Iran for Afghanistan, they were eased. The Shabahar, the transit rate, that was open in the some of the border posts were jointly invested by 3 countries: U.S., United Kingdom, and Iran. So they established that along the border in order to stem the traffic of opium. On the other hand, the Afghanistan and Iran continued to have very close ties, close relations. Official relations were also good, but Iran always follows 2-track policy. One track is officially with the government. The other track is with the establishing spheres of influence with the Shias, Hazaras, and others. For that reason, actually, once I traveled to Iran and asked Mr. Khatami was president at that time. I had a one-on-one meeting with him, and I told him that anything that you have you had in terms of relations with the government actually helped the country. And also Iran supported the reconstruction of Afghanistan. But what you have, these other channels, these are not only undermine the stability of the country, but at the same time, it's not good for that communities because this create more animosity. So therefore, all the time that the foreign troops was in Afghanistan, there was a very following a very delicate line that the United States or Afghanistan or other countries did not want to create some kind of a tension between Iran and Afghanistan. At the time that Pakistan was supporting actively with it. Later on, of course, they had the Taliban when they wanted to this, to hedge their bets that they thought when they will come to power sometimes. So they actually continued, not only them, but also Russia and China. In fact, the Shindan, the staying away from, keeping Iranian away from Shindan and from Razaranj was a deliberate policy.
You want to
Can I-
comment?
yeah. So Iranians, of course, always Afghanistan wanted to be a good cop, and they didn't want to provoke any of their neighbors. And it was the Afghanistan neighbors that never had mercy on us without any legitimate reason. All the time they supported always the central government's oppositions. In 20 years, it was the Iranians who gave hope, beside the Pakistanis, to the Taliban that, okay, Americans are going to Iraq, stay, we will support you, and you will come back. That was the hope given by Iranians. And beside that, where was Mullah Mansour hit? Right at the border between Iran and Pakistan. What was he doing? He, with the part of the military commission from Quetta, most of the Taliban from Helmand, Nimruz, Farah, Herat, their ties was long-term with the Iranians. And during these years, especially in 2017, 2 times I was deployed to Iraq, to Farah. And Maulwi Manan was someone who was the shadow governor of Helmand, who was the narco trafficker with Naeem Barit. They were tied to Bashar Nurzai and that network. The point is that the Iranians provided them with laser-guided weapons, scopes, ammunition to take over Farah. And I was leading the task force at that time that we saved Farah. I was in National Directorate of Security at that time, part of JSOC. The point is that Iranians never had hesitation to harm us, especially from the first day when Americans showed up in Afghanistan. And it was an interest, I can say, relationship between the Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China, and Central Asian countries. They were never happy with that. And I think step by step, they got what they wanted. My point is, if we were there still, eventually the situation would have led to something like we are facing today. It would have been a big leverage being there, and we could do a lot of stuff there. I think Afghanistan someday should come out of being a landlocked to have routes to the waters, because we are a rich country and we have lithium and we have the future of the world, which is the battery and green energy. And we are locked. If we are locked by such kind of neighbors, I don't think we will have a business for Afghan people. We will always stay the poorest country sitting on a treasure for next centuries. I believe we should have thought about this earlier when we were there. One more thing, last thing, I'm not going to make it long. Afghanistan in 20 years never had a clear strategy. SDSR, Strategic Defense and Security Review. We never knew if Taliban were our enemy or friend, if US was our friend or enemy, or Pakistan, or which neighbor at what level. That was missing. I started from being a second lieutenant all the way to a 4-star. I never faced this. Whatever we were doing, it was mostly our own initiative that we understood that if we don't do it, Afghanistan will face a bad situation like today. So somebody has to help me with that. I don't think we had that. We never heard it, officially, unofficially. And there's no clarity in the command. What can you expect? If you're putting your commanders in jail for conducting special operations against the terrorists, what can you expect from the soldiers under his hand? If Americans do this, if Brits do this, if Russians do this, if Chinese do this, if Indians do this, if any country's leadership does that to their officers, they will stop and reduce fighting. It will. I was almost being jailed for positive things I did. I saved Farah. I faced five casualties on my 20th operation in 1 week, nonstop. And then the next day, before me taking my dead soldiers evacuated, the delegation showed up. And we were all introduced to the attorney. And I was hiding for 2 months. Does it work like that? Who will do it? We did our best. That's why I'm saying there was a lot of leakage. There was a lot of vulnerabilities we needed to fix. The biggest problem, another problem, was counterintelligence.
I think at this point we should open it up to the audience. Are we going to have to pass? Where's Evgeny? Are we going to have to pass this microphone around?
I think so.
Okay, so let's get the one microphone. Let's get that microphone there. If I'm in control of the back and forth.
Whose question is
Wanna
up
give it
first?
to that gentleman? Yeah. The Pakistani, American.
Yes, my name is Cami Butt. I'm with the Pakistani Spectator. And my question is, you address the role of Pakistani generals after Soviet Union left Afghanistan. Doesn't Pakistan played an evil role from the very beginning? And in order to substantiate this allegation, I would say there are more than 100 Pakistani retired generals who have adopted Canadian nationality. They looted the country. They looted American taxpayers' dollars. They misled people. I was young when I came here in 1985. I've been here for 40. I wanted to join Afghan jihad because I was so inspired by being a Muslim. But now I feel everything is evil. Even Islam is evil. I can say Islam is evil in America because of First Amendment, but if I say in Pakistan, they would cut my throat. So why have they become so extremist? It's because of CIA pump billions of dollars. It's because America gave them training. America radicalized those people when we were very young. We were radicalized against communism. We were radicalized against socialism, and Pakistani nation has become, I wouldn't say evil, but they have become very bad actor. So my question to you is this. I asked this question about Afghan jihad like 15 years ago at Washington think tank. So if you have, because your presentation is very much evolved around Pakistan.
My question is how fair it is to be too critical of ISI without putting things in context, because like Mr. Box said that it was helped by US. It's creating some problem in Iranian Balochistan, and we don't criticize that because it's in our national interest. We don't want to discuss Kashmir issue. That is the kind of mother root of all these problems and the justification. But ISI,
Okay.
we don't
Okay.
criticize Reagan administration who equated
Oh, okay. So Reagan administration pumped billions of dollars. Saudi Arabia pumped billions of dollars. For what? For this, because Pakistan has become totally intolerant country on the name of Islam. So shouldn't you criticize Pakistani generals from the very beginning when they were creating a problem in Afghanistan, when there was Soviet Union there? In Soviet Union time, at least women can wear skirt. They could go to school. And the Taliban product you produced, CIA produced, Pakistani ISI produced, are totally animals. I'm so sorry, I'm getting...
Let me get to that.
So I will just hand over this.
Okay, that's a good question, but any person who is in a staff college will know that in any strategy there's your end means ways. Same time, the what Clausewitz actually called the destructions. What you have, yeah, but in many cases in Afghanistan, jihad that you call it, there was no relationship between ends, means, ways. And in 1993 October, there was a conference, policy conference in Monterey, California, and Afghan Alternative. That was the nation. I think the name of the conference. What should be done in Afghanistan? At that time, I think the policy was making what to do with the Soviet presence in Afghanistan. That conference, that was an international conference, and we had speakers from all over the world. From Afghanistan, the late Majru was there, and Rishtia, the late Shah was there. From Pakistan, all these brass was there. And I was with Slick Harrison, I think the late Slick Harrison, with the only people that we argued that the Soviet Union was eventually leave Afghanistan. Look after that, what I was going to think about that. If you're bringing all these extremists from around the world in order to give them a bloody nose in Afghanistan, you know what happened after the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union is not going to leave Afghanistan until they turn it into another satellite country like Mongolia. And I had two arguments at that time. The first argument was the Afghans are fighting the Soviet Union, they do not care to win or lose. They think that's the right thing to do. How long they can continue that kind of a war? The British didn't do it because British realized that these people are fighting not to win or lose, but just the right thing to do. That is going to happen. The second thing was I earlier mentioned the Argarkov treaties. At that time, it was translated in English. It was circled around. And he usually actually said this, the quantity is no longer important. Quality is important. The West ahead of us in advanced strategy. If you cannot catch up, you will turn. The millions of tanks are not going to help us. Millions of the aircraft will not help us. So therefore, in order to do the Argarkov proposed, in order to change, you have to change for technologically. In order to, the technology change requires economic change. Economic change requires political change. So I said, if this change comes, the first thing they do is leave Afghanistan. When they leave Afghanistan, what you will have that any strategy which does not look for the end state is doomed to failure. Because these people who are fighting, they came from Africa, from Indonesia, from Arab countries, fighting in Afghanistan just for a cause. And I know who they were. Three categories. I'm not going to go to details. They are fighting. What will happen? The Soviet Union is out, and Pakistan has divided these mujahideen into fundamentalists and moderates, and they will fight, and all these people will be the army of instability in the region. However,
Pakistan in charge of this army of instability.
yes, it was, because at that time, those groups who were fighting according to the Pakistani ideology, they received a lot of resources. The others, well, were not so much. At the same time, the Arab sheikhs who came, the Saudi Arabia we mentioned, who came, the first people that they will go to, Mr. Sayaf or Gulbuddin Ekmatyar or Mr. Rabbani or Khalis.
But could you have kicked out Soviet Union from Afghanistan without the help of Zia or without the help of Pakistani army?
In Pakistan, actually from the beginning, read the Charlie Wilson War. That war, he claims this, that Pakistan, so the United States wanted to help. So the North was Russia, West was Iran, and only Pakistan was a neighbor. So take your pick for Pakistan. That is the only way. Pakistan had this arrangement. Okay, we will help, but only under our supervisions, and under our conditions. That's why all these things are. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Don. Good evening, dobry wieczór, как дела, sobekher, chatore, and to General Fields, ura semper fi. I'm Chris Orr, former Air Force officer, current senior defense editor for 1945 National Security Journal, and proud supporter of both Remembrance Society and the Senate Square Society. My question is about the late, great Ahmed Shah Massoud, the Lion of Peshawar. May Allah rest his soul. If there's any fellow Ken Follett fans here, you might remember he was also a central character in the best-selling novel Lie Down with Lions. Remember back when the global war on terror and Operation Enduring Freedom in particular was a fresh news item, some of my friends and family members on the left were left-leaning say, oh, well, Osama bin Laden was your best friend during the Soviet-Afghan war. I'd be like, au contraire. Ahmed Shah Massoud was the primary beneficiary of our CIA military aid. I'm sure you all remember, he eventually became the leader of Northern Alliance, and he was assassinated by the Taliban the night before the 9/11 attacks. So my question is, now that unfortunately the Taliban is back in charge of Afghanistan, what is Mr. Massoud's lasting legacy in the country? Has the Taliban pretty much erased his memory, sent him down the proverbial memory hole, or they at least honor his courage and sacrifice in fighting the Soviet occupation? Thank you. Or spasiba.
I think
Thank you. But I would say, yes, we had great leaders during last 50 years of Afghanistan. With all the negative things, we had some positive stuff too. And Afghanistan lost millions of their sons, and Ahmad Shah Massoud was one of them. Another could be me. I lost my cousin who was guarding me in one of the operations, and he got shot. And that one bullet, we lost him. Like my family member, like my aunt's son. Afghanistan is used with losing their best ones, but we always have plenty of them. If one Ahmad Shah Massoud dies, 100 gets birth. 100 dies, 1,000 will get birth against the enemies of Afghanistan and Afghan people. I believe still we have a lot of Ahmad Shah Massouds, and I personally respect him. I see him as a leader. His legacy is still acceptable and respectable for us, for young generation. And we have other leaders like Ahmad Shah Massoud too, alive, that we, in young generation, that we can see the spirit he had in these young people and young generation. I believe we are missing him, but from another way, we have plenty of Ahmad Shah Massouds in Afghanistan now.
Yes. Thank you for the discussion. My name is Prab Ashi. So my question is on Zia-ul Haq. I never heard his name because he was the Pakistan leader back when the Soviets were trying to come in. So my question is that, he was a very pious leader, as you know, and he brought a lot of Islamist, things to Pakistan. Do you think he was the main reason why America, had to go with jihad? Because he probably was the one who taught US that, hey, you should preach jihad and give that strategy to the Afghanis to actually help them fight Soviets. Because to be quite frank with you, America was more Christianized than, Islamicized. Do you think that Zia-ul Haq had a big role to play, in terms of Afghanis using jihad? Because no way I can believe that America knew that much about jihad, or even Quran as well, say. And also Balochistan, is announcing their independence on August 11th, few days from now. Do you think US should support it? Just on the sideline, as a question.
I think you want to take that. We have people who have to catch airplanes. It's a good question. Zia-ul Haq collaborated with us and with the Saudis. And billions of dollars went into Pakistan from Saudi Arabia to create madrasas and to the idea was to create a generational opposition to communism, and that it would come from the Islamic world. And I think in that regard, we sowed the wind and are today reaping the whirlwind. The jihadists from Afghanistan that participated in the 1980s resistance to the Soviet Union were people like Ahmad Shah Massoud. He was a jihadist. Jihad was a good word in the 1980s, right? It was the freedom fighters. And those members of the Shia community, the Sunni community outside of, say, Gulbuddin Kepkatyar, they collaborated with the Western style government. They were ministers, and but I think the very process that you talked about has created, this super fundamentalist type of philosophy of the Taliban, and the Pakistanis encouraged it because they also had designs on Afghanistan. And if they could control the Taliban, they could control Afghanistan. Now, the chickens have come home to roost, and things are quite different today, but that's what happens when you support people who are of that kind of radical ilk. You need the mic.
But why is US taking the blame that we did it? Pakistan actually did that. Why is we taking the blame of that jihad thing, whatever happened?
Yeah. I think we never thought the Soviet Union would collapse in 1991. And that, again, I said this was to be a kind of generational opposition, and it got out of control. But the fact is, I in 1997 was on a fact-finding mission to the Taliban, and this is the Afghanistan Foundation. Zal Khalilzad was the chairman at the time, before he became special envoy and ambassador and UN ambassador. And so the people that I met on this trip were not just officials of the Taliban government, but the people who were running the country. And they were ISI colonels, totally. The Taliban had no clue as to how to administer a society. The Pakistanis did it.
Thank you. Just a quick question. It's obviously been some time since the United States had an Afghanistan policy with current events, things Badakhshan. What would you think if the United States was to have an Afghanistan policy? What should be part of it?
Do you want to take that? He's asking if the United States had an Afghanistan policy. What should it be?
I think there is an unfinished business that is the terrorism. That's the first thing. They still exist there in Afghanistan. And beside that, we see if you look at the great power competition and the China role in Afghanistan that is stealing the rare earth minerals to dominate the green energy market, Afghanistan would be their first and shortest and easiest bite to take the lithiums from Afghanistan. It just needs a road that they have already started.
It's not just lithium. It is every major.
A lot of other stuff too.
Copper.
Yeah. It's trillions of dollars worth wealth in Afghanistan. China, for Chinese, it would be very expensive to get those material from countries like Ukraine, from DRC, from Chile, from other parts of the world. Afghanistan is just next door. Another point as a policy would be the Ukraine-Russia war. Russians, I don't think they will stop only in Ukraine. They are going to go as much deep as they could. They will not stop. Baltic states would be the next, and they will keep moving. And because they're still selling oil, gas, whatever. So Afghanistan is a country that the security of Afghanistan or the Afghanistan geographic location might help US with some achievements in that region. I don't want to touch base here, but that's something. Again, Afghanistan and Iran thing could be part of the policy. Right now, you don't have a ground to get into Iran if you were thinking about a ground invasion. If things gets more worse, where will you go from? From those mountains? It's very tough. You need a flat land. That's Afghanistan. That is Nimroz, that is Farah, that is Shendan, that is Duer Air Base, that is the Bastion in Helmand, that is the Kandahar airfield, that is the background. I believe we had these things and still those bases exist. The runways are there, the barracks are there, the big construction is there. The point is that Afghanistan still has a significant role in that region and in global power, like the great power competition. And there's a lot more details, but I would just mention all and keep it brief like this.
General Fields, do you want to comment on that? What do you think the U.S. policy would look like today if we had one? Or should we have one?
Well, I think, yes, sir. I believe we should have a policy. And we have so much upon which to build that policy with our experiences in Iraq, together with our experiences in Afghanistan, and the broad general political laydown of our world right now, in which China still plays a major role. There are significant resources, energy, mineral resources in Afghanistan. China signed up to that years ago. I have not kept up with the extent to which those minerals are being exploited today.
Fantastic amount of mineral wealth.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So my bottom line, Congressman, is that yes, sir, we should have a Afghanistan policy, and these are the kinds of measures that we should consider as we very thoughtfully build that policy. Thank you, sir.
Yes, my only question would be more to you, Congressman David and General, because especially you two, I know you were very involved back in the 80s, what we were doing there. When at the time, back in the late 85, early 86, when Gorbachev realized that he cannot sustain the occupation and decided to pull out, we accepted the Dr. Wakil, the foreign minister of the time of the Kabul government, which they not had no more than few major cities in their control, and the majority of the population was supporting the Mujahideen, and Mujahideen was controlling at least over 80% of the territory. but we accepted the Kabul government foreign minister as a party, and we decided to give the Mujahideen representative to Shahzada Yaqub Khan, the Pakistani foreign minister. And US and Soviet Union sat as a guarantor in that meeting in Geneva. Fast forward to 2020, when we start again to find a negotiated solution, the government that we supported for the past 20 years with our own blood and our own resources, been billions and billions of dollars, which had at least a support of more than half of the Afghan population, at least over 3 million people elected that government, and more than 50% of the territory was under the Kabul government control. But when we sat in Doha, Mr. Khalilzad was talking to Taliban directly and keeping the Afghan government in the dark. I mean, I cannot understand where is the wisdom of always trying to find a solution and think that is the right thing to do and just shove it through the throat. And in my opinion, as General alluded to, I not seen any policy in the past, nor in the past 20 years of our engagement, and I didn't see it today either. So I would be rather more willing to hear from your perspective.
I think it's a failure of the United States and its allies to have a better understanding of several things: the geostrategic importance, the economic importance, the human rights, the rights of women. We simply we didn't consider those things. We wanted to get that is, the Trump administration wanted to get the war over as quickly as possible, and set the Taliban up in Doha, which was a tremendous, I think, mistake. The only difference between Trump and the Biden administration on the issue would have been, I believe that, they expected a coalition government to settle in, and the Taliban in Pakistan were having nothing of that. But I think that the Trump administration would have hit very hard Taliban leadership. They would have, doing a lot of bombing of the opposition. I don't think they would have just let it collapse like that. The idea of taking the military out before you had any kind of coalition, it was precipitous beyond belief, and one of the great failures of American foreign policy in our history. But I was going to ask. There is an opposition out there, and it's quite discounted by the Western powers. But there's a national resistance front. There's also another organization, I think Sami Sadat's organization. What are your thoughts about these organizations and where they might take?
Well, if you compare this to first 5 years of the Republic, the opposition has an upper hand. It's more than 3 or 4 opposition groups by now. It's maybe a dozen now, but it works. It's all against the Taliban and the ones who are ruling Afghanistan the worst way in Afghanistan history. The way they are treating people have never happened in Afghanistan. I have not read about that. They are the worst kind of Afghan representation as a organization or as a group or as a government. So we have a saying in Dari, Batangomat, Bajangomat. When you have no other way, you have to fight. But I would more appreciate a high level coordination between all these groups. And my concern would be not to become another civil war. So it needs people to help them out, to get coordinated and become a strong coalition or one group or one-handed people. However, there are some former ANDSF members part of these resistances from day one of the collapse that once worked for me and I worked for some other person and then some other person, but we were always like a family. Still, we are connected. We talk to each other. It doesn't mean that if I'm sitting here, I'm not going to support it, but I would appreciate and support something more coordinated, more deliberate, more decisive, more planned operations and attacks against the Taliban. But the most important thing for me at this point would be post-Taliban, what kind of Afghanistan we want. Because people need food, education, healthcare, business, jobs, agriculture, water supply, and power. So we need to consider that from today. Otherwise, once the civil war kicks off, it will take a lot of unnecessary lives. The problem that we can solve today, why should we wait for tomorrow? The war can go on against the Taliban, but we need to figure out something politically to take care of Afghanistan post-Taliban in a better way, not in a worse way or the same like Taliban. That's the thing.
Yeah, I think with that, did you have a question? Yeah. All right, that'd be the last question then. Okay.
Hello, my name is Charles. A brief question. What is your view on the history of U.S. and ANA relations? And I ask because it had been often told that there was much tension, told by many U.S. officials that there was systemic corruption, desertion, treason in the ANA, reaching a boiling point in 2014 with the assassination of Major General Harold J. Greene. What do you make of these tensions, and how would you characterize U.S.-ANA relations?
I think every day it was more promising and as close as I have never heard of that kind of relationship from my older elders. Of course, there were some situations that we could not avoid, and we led into some incidents that no one wanted. But the point is, I remember Mike Spain, who came to Afghanistan and who lost his life there. And I do remember the Mike, who was a 7th Group Special Forces S2 in Kunduz in 2019. Just a week before he got hit with an IED in Chardara district of Kunduz, I was with him, and his commander was Afghan name, Wali Khan, 7th Group. He's now a big person. The point is, he lost his life. He was the last American soldier or officer lost his life in combat. It's separate from the Abbey Gate, in combat, shoulder to shoulder or shana bashana. The point is, it was a kind of relationship that this dude would put himself in front of the bullet that was hitting me, and I would put myself in front of the bullet that was going to hit him. And we had thousands of operations every year. Partnered ops, enabled ops, and yes, of course, we had some moments that we had bad experiences. It was not deliberate. It was not planned. It was totally based on some misunderstanding that cannot put any shade on our sacrifices together and our work and brotherhood together. So we were the most closest brothers in arms in that hot zone called Afghanistan for 20 years. And I remember that our soldiers, dead bodies, wounded soldiers would be taken to Bagram. And I remember that we had our American brothers that they needed help and we would go and help them out. It's not limited to ANA units, commandos, special forces, Air Force. We were flying together on our Night Stalker unit, which is called Special Mission Wing. The right pilot would be American, the left would be Afghan. The left would be American, the right would be Afghan. We would drive on convoys, a company of commandos and special forces with a team of ODA. We would be clearing the IEDs for them. We would be positioning ourselves to breach before they get into the compounds. So it was a mixed job that we were doing that if it was not us, it would be a company of American forces there. So they could count on us that way. I don't say that there was nothing wrong, but every day it was getting strong and strong, tactically, operationally, and strategically. And the best time for that kind of coordination was it started around 2019 all the way to Doha deal, when some new people showed up, soft guys, and they understood us. We understood their language easily, and this coordination in all three levels got to the best time ever. So that's my memory and that's my understanding of the situation. And I believe those were the best days that we were together and fighting the common enemy. I respect that.
Thank you for your question. Just a couple of comments to wrap up. I think the discussion here definitely lands in my head and my heart that Afghanistan was definitely worth saving, and that the abandonment of Afghanistan was a tragedy, a geostrategic and human tragedy of the first order. So, and it's very hard to reverse. That essentially the West abandoned its ally in that crucial part of the world, but Pakistan and Iran, they didn't abandon their allies, particularly Pakistan. And we essentially lost the war to Pakistan and their proxies. With respect to the war in Iran today, I think the general had pointed out that had we been there, had we had these incredible bases, forward operating bases, almost right on the border, that it could have made a heck of a difference in going to war with Iran. But right now, we're trying to win a war from airplanes, and that hasn't really happened. And the whole idea of boots on the ground is a no-no for our policymakers. And I think it would be a mistake in any event to go in on the ground if you weren't Iranian resistance forces. But I think that's what we're lacking in that war today. So I want to thank our panelists, thank Anna Borshevskaya, who had to leave early to catch a plane, Ali Jalali, who had a very long trip getting here as well, and we thank you, General Fields, for staying around and answering questions, and also to General Alizai, who I think made a significant case for the value of our work in Afghanistan and the value we should have invested in the Afghan people.
So with that, thank you all very much for coming.